Welcome to Hypergrowth San Francisco 2019. I'm excited to be interviewing Nir Eyal. And did I say Eyal right?
Close enough.
Close enough. So let me hear you say it.
Nir Eyal.
Eyal.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I grew up in Queens, New York, and the area that I grew up in, Queens, New York, where I was the only person who was not Jewish, and half my friends were Israeli and half of them were American Jews.
Oh,
so
okay.
all my friends were like Ophir, Ayelet, exactly. So I should have pronounced
Pretty
that
close.
correctly.
Oh.
That is awesome. So thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
I'm obsessed and we give out multiple. We have a book club at Drift, and one of the books that we give out is your previous book called Habit. Probably no surprise to you.
Hooked.
I'm sorry. I'm digging Hooked Habits.
No
Yeah,
problem.
Hooked. And that one's been a big one for us. But now you've written this new book, right? And what made you shift from a very domain specific, I think almost like techie kind of, growth loop kind of mind to more general?
Yeah, so Hooked was really written for the person who is building a habit-forming product.
Yep.
It's about how to build healthy habits in users' lives. Because I really think that, for so many businesses, they are so dependent, their business model depends on repeat engagement.
Yeah.
And so I when I started to uncover some of the deeper psychology behind how products are designed to bring people back, I wanted to democratize those techniques. I wanted everyone to know how Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and Slack, how they are designed to bring us back, so that we can all use those techniques for good and to democratize those techniques. But of course, the question I kept getting asked is, okay, so you taught people how to build good habits, what about the bad habits?
Yeah.
And so that's where Indistractable came from.
And what got you into that world to be able to write Hooked in the first place?
Yes.
Because it was so inside.
Yeah. So I started 2 tech companies.
Yeah.
The last of which was at the intersection of gaming and advertising, and I had this front row seat to see how these companies would come and go, and some of them would be really successful, and others would kind of peter out. Solely based on the engagement of their users. That we talk a lot about growth, and growth is very important, but it's only one of 3 legs of the stool, right? You need growth, you need engagement, and you need monetization. And so I saw a lot out there about growth, but I didn't see a lot around engagement. And the thing about engagement is that you can't buy engagement, right? You can buy growth, right? But if you buy a lot of growth with advertising and a lot of campaigns to buy users, if you can't keep them around, you're a leaky bucket, right? Just users come in and they all fall out. And so it was imperative, I believe, to build the kind of products that not only can grow the user base, but also can retain them. If you want to grow your business, you have to figure out ways to keep people coming back.
And that company that you had where you discovered that was called Ad Nectar, is that right?
Right.
That's fun. Because a common friend of yours, Jules, was telling me about that, and he was like, "Oh, is this company Ad Nectar?" I was like, "I totally remember that company," because I had a company at the same time in the same space. It was called Lookery. And we did social gaming apps as well, same thing. So we
had a very common experience then. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so that's where I started to see firsthand some of these patterns, but then I had seen no one write about them, right? They were kind of like these secret patterns from certain people, like at Zynga and other people, and then no one wrote about it in general. That's why I was fascinated when your book came out.
Yeah. I mean, the idea, I didn't invent these techniques. They were being used, but they were being used by companies saying, well, that's what our competition does, or that's what we did last time, without a real based understanding of why these things actually work. Yeah. And so I didn't, a lot of these techniques were used by the gaming companies, by advertisers, by social networks. But I figured, what if we could use these techniques to help people exercise more and save money and be more productive at work? And that's exactly what's happened in the past 5 years since I wrote Hooked, that thousands of companies have used these very same techniques to build healthy habits. And
so if you go back in time, you grew up in Israel and you emigrated to the US?
No, I grew up in Orlando, Florida.
Orlando, Florida?
Yeah.
That's nothing like Israel.
Nothing like Israel. I left when I was 3 years old.
Oh, 3 years old.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. What led you from Israel to Orlando, Florida?
My parents pursued the American dream, and Orlando had really good schools, and it was relatively close to Israel versus California or West
weather-wise.
Coast. Weather-wise, not that dissimilar.
And
And then I went to school in Atlanta, and then migrated up to New York, and then from New York moved to California for business school.
I always say that I want to do a book one day or a documentary just to figure out because my parents emigrated here as well to the U.S., like the immigration patterns, because sometimes you'll just talk to someone who will go from somewhere totally different to like the middle of the country, small town, and I can never figure out like what is the story that got someone from someplace in Africa all the way to someplace in Mississippi.
Yeah, where did your parents immigrate from?
My mom immigrated from Ecuador, and my dad from Puerto Rico, and then they met in New York City, and that's
and you
where
grew
I
up
grew up.
there.
Yeah, I grew up in New York, and so it's just a fascinating kind of passage. So if you think about your latest book, Indistractable, which I'm listening to on Audible, what led you there? I get the patterns of the reversing it, but what made you want to write another book?
Yeah, so for me, it was really a personal need that in my life, when I wrote Hooked, I didn't have many people calling me. I wasn't very busy. I wasn't kind of nobody heard of me, and when the book started to succeed, we've sold 250,000 copies now of Hooked.
What?
Yeah.
Really? That's amazing.
So somehow it went, I wrote it for people who are making habit-forming products, and I self-published it at first, and I thought, okay, this would be, a few thousand people would buy it, and somehow it reached a wider audience of people outside of tech who were interested in it as well. And then I started getting a lot of phone calls. I started getting a lot of consulting engagements and speaking engagements. And suddenly, the one thing that had made me successful, the speaking and the research and the writing, now was crowded out by all these other opportunities, which was great. But what I really loved to do and what I missed doing was writing. And so I would sit down on my desk and I'd say, okay, now I'm going to write. And I would get distracted. Right?
Yeah.
I would check email. I would Google something. I would constantly get distracted. And
falling into the same patterns that you wrote about?
Well, no, that's when I started writing.
Okay, got it.
Not so much, so Hooked is really about healthy habits. I don't think I really succumbed to these bad habits that you typically think of, like social media, that was, or gaming. But I tell you what, like email, it's a constant distraction, still can be a constant distraction. And that's, I think, is something that's very, very important, that, people think of distraction, they only think of the obvious stuff. Yep. They think about social media and video games. But I would argue that anything that is not what you plan to do with your time is a distraction. And those distractions are actually more sinister because we think to ourselves, oh, I'm just checking email. That's kind of worky. I need to do that anyway. But if it's not what you plan to do with your time, it is a distraction.
And what are the habits that you form yourself now? And I know that for me, I constantly have to reevaluate my habits and change them over time and figure out what sticks and what doesn't. But what are the habits now that you have that help you with this distraction?
Yeah, so Indistractable is a very systematic approach to dealing with distractions. 4 parts, and it took me 5 years to write this book because there's so much folk psychology and misinformation out there on how to manage distraction and procrastination and focus. And one of the biggest myths is that the technology is the problem.
Yep.
And I don't agree at all. That technology is the tool. The thing is, we don't know how to use the technology, or many times it's misused on us.
Yeah, sure.
Meaning that, one of the most important chapters in the book is this chapter on workplace culture, and how what I found was that distraction in the workplace is a symptom of dysfunctional company culture. Yep. That when companies have a healthy workplace culture, distraction is a problem that people can talk about, right? So the real problem is that we can't talk about the problem of distraction. And so at companies like Slack, for example, Slack is a company I profiled in the book. They don't have a problem with tech distraction, even though you would think, look, Slack is, this product.
The epitome.
Right, everybody complains that Slack is distracting us, but if you go to Slack, they should be the most distracted people on earth. They're not.
Why is that?
Because of 3 things. So number 1, they have a culture of psychological safety.
Okay.
And psychological safety is this tenet where people can talk about their problems without fear of getting fired. So that's the first criteria. People can raise their hand and say, hey boss, this isn't working for me. Can we talk about this? And it turns out that is a very important trait. If you look at corporate malfeasance from Boeing, the 737 disaster, to Enron, there's always people who knew about the problem but didn't want to talk because they were afraid of getting fired. So when we look at distraction as a problem like any other, when we open the ability of employees to talk about their problems without fear of retribution, we can fix the problem of distraction. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that they have a forum to talk about the problem. So many companies, they don't give people a place to talk about their concerns. So at Slack, it's interesting. They actually use Slack channels
to do it.
Right? They have this one Slack channel called Beef Tweets, where you can post anything, any beef about the company. And so that's number 2. And then number 3, and most importantly, is that the company management needs to exemplify what it means to be indistractable. that culture flows downhill.
Yeah.
And so if management is always on, always connected, always pinging and dinging people, well then this drives people crazy. And in fact, it's been shown to lead to even more distraction. You know, we know that about half of the emails that you send and receive every day, you did not need to send and receive. We've all seen these superfluous meetings that people call. So we think about, you know, just the technology distracting us, but in actuality, between the emails and the meetings all day, you know, the average knowledge worker only has about an hour and a half all day to do anything but meetings and email. And so that constant reacting is taking a toll on our ability to reflect. But it's only through reflection that we actually solve our difficult problems. We need time to think. And so when a company can promote this kind of indistractable environment from the top down, that's really where we start to see things take hold. And in fact, if you go into Slack headquarters, you will see a big sign in pink neon letters that says "Work hard and go home." It actually says that on the company walls because everybody at the company, from Stuart Butterfield on down, believes in this principle that when we're at work, we're going to work, and we're at home, we're at home.
Leave. Yeah, I love that. And if you were creating a company, if you were back creating a company, how do you think you would encourage creating this psychological safety, right, in your company?
So it really comes from walking the walk, right? Not just talking the talk, right? You can say, "Oh, please, we want your feedback." But if people notice that people who speak their minds are fired or treated differently, then that's it. So there's a lot of literature out there. Google did this seminal study on psychological safety, and they found that actually the teams that perform best, we're constantly told this myth, I think, in the startup community that, you know, A players hire A players. That it's about getting the best people there, and it's good. You should get good people. But here's the thing. That's not the most important trait. That what Google found was it wasn't the best people that had the best teams. It was the teams that had that had psychological safety to talk about their problems. Those were the people who did best on a team basis. And so it is an incredibly important trait.
After selling 250,000 books with Hooked, what led you to want to write another book? Because to me, I've written one, and it seems incredibly painful.
I really like it. I mean, I write books when I read everyone else's book on the topic, and they don't satisfy me. They don't answer my problem. So I read every book about building engaging products, but they didn't nail it for me. There was a lot of books out there about how to build personal habits. There was a lot of books about how to build product, but there wasn't a book about how to build habit-forming products. And so I wanted to write that book for myself. And then with Indistractable, there were a lot of books about focus and time management. There were a lot of books about technology overuse, but there wasn't a book specifically about how to fight distraction. And I tried what the other books told me to do. I got rid of my technology. I got a flip phone. I got a word processor. Oh, I did all that stuff because that's what the books tell. I went on this 30-day digital detox. It doesn't work. At least it didn't work for me because I didn't address the real root cause of why I was getting distracted. That the big revelation for me is that distraction is not just about the external triggers, the pings and dings and rings. Most distraction starts from within. It's the internal triggers. It's anxiety, uncertainty, stress. We are looking for emotional pacification from some kind of distraction, whether it's too much tech, too much booze, too much news. It's all about fixing something inside of us that we don't want to feel, and we turn to that distraction impulsively. So just blaming the thing outside of us doesn't fix the problem. We have to figure out what's going on inside as well.
Yeah, I love that you write and talk about that because to me, I always think that these are just human patterns. These are not technology. We get so lost in talking about technology. Like, there is no technology. There's just humans and patterns, and those patterns have largely been the same. And everything is usually a distraction from addressing the real problems, right? Those human, either communication problems or problems that you have in your own life that you haven't addressed. And all of these things are reactions to them, right? They're kind of like the surface.
Now, I will say that if you are looking for distraction,
it's easier.
It's easier than ever to find, right? So that's for sure. That these products do prey to some degree on these emotional needs.
For sure.
But that doesn't mean we're helpless and hopeless. And I think a lot of tech critics want to perpetuate this myth that I think is very harmful, that technology is addicting everyone, that technology is hijacking your brain. That is bullshit. And in fact, teaching people that is harmful because it leads to what we call learned helplessness. People say, oh, there's nothing I can do. Look at my kids acting crazy because of the video game, or I can't do anything. The Facebook algorithm has me, doing. And it's not helpful and it's not true.
besides buying the book, where else should we send people to learn more about this Indistractable?
I appreciate it. So Indistractable, the subtitle is How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. It's available wherever books are sold. And my blog is Nir and Far. And Nir is spelled like my first name, NIR and far.com. And of course, you can go to Indistractable.com. There's a video course and a workbook and all kinds of freebies there as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Nir, for joining us. I look forward to your talk later today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you, brother.